We're good to go.
All right, welcome to the CCIW's first ever Career in College Athletics webinar. I'm Rusty Lindsay. I'm the Athletics Communication Assistant and Broadcast Director at Wheaton College, and I'll be your moderator for our first session today, which is Key Players in College Athletics. Tonight, we're going to be joined by three panelists from Illinois Wesleyan University, Director of Athletic Communications, Katie Gonzalez; from Carroll University, Assistant Athletics Director for Compliance and Senior Women Administrator, Bianca Smith; and from Wheaton College, Assistant Athletic Trainer, Mark Demchak. Panelists, thank you for being a part of our webinar this evening. Just to give you a little bit of info on our panelists, Katie Gonzalez joined the Titans in August of 2019, following a 4-year stint as the Assistant Director of Athletic Media Relations at Division I Eastern Michigan University. At Eastern Michigan, she served as the primary contact for women's soccer, women's basketball, swimming and diving, and softball. She also spearheaded the department's creative content efforts and social media strategies. She is a 2014 graduate of Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa, where she was a student intern in their sports information office before becoming the school's assistant director of athletic communications in her senior year. She is a member of the College Sports Information Directors of America, serving on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee and the Academic All-America Committee, and she's also a member of the Minority Opportunities Athletic Association and Women Leaders in College Sports. Katie, welcome, and thank you for serving as one of our panelists today. Another one of our panelists, Bianca Smith, joined the Pioneers in August of 2019. Prior to coming to Carroll, she spent 2 years at Case Western Reserve as the Athletics Compliance Assistant, where she created a monthly compliance newsletter, ran annual team compliance meetings, and assisted in transferring files and records to electronic databases. Smith also worked as an intern in the Major League Baseball corporate office, as well as coaching and assisting with both the Cincinnati Reds and the Texas Rangers. She holds a Master's of Business Administration in Sports Management from Weatherhead School of Management and received a Doctorate of Jurisprudence with an emphasis in sport law from Case Western Reserve. During her time there, Smith worked on research projects regarding NCAA antitrust laws, diversity in baseball, and Major League Baseball salary caps. Bianca, welcome, and thank you for serving with us today. And then our third panelist today is Mark Demchak, who is a 2011 graduate of Indiana Wesleyan University, where he completed a Bachelor of Science degree in athletic training. At Indiana Wesleyan, he worked with baseball, softball, track, and cross-country teams, as well as football at local high schools. Demchak was a 4-year varsity soccer athlete where he was an all-conference and all-American honoree. A native of San Diego, California, he works for both OAD Orthopedics and Wheaton College, serving with both the Wheaton women's soccer and baseball teams. Mark, welcome, and again, thank you for serving as a panelist today. We are also joined by Mike Krisman, who serves as the CCIW's Assistant Executive Director, and he will be monitoring the chat function for questions from our audience. So if you have a question for one of our panelists today, be sure to type it into the Zoom chat function at the bottom of your screen. And once we are finished with the moderator questions, we will go ahead and get to questions that are submitted by the audience. So with that, let's begin with our first question for the group. And our first question I will direct to you, Bianca, and that is, what drew you to a career in college athletics, and specifically your area of focus?
There we go. Sorry about that. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the panel. Definitely appreciate being able to talk about having a career in college athletics. As far as what drew me to college athletics in general, always been a sports fan, played softball and baseball, and was a cheerleader when I was in college. So that was always kind of a path for me. And really also college athletics just gives me an opportunity to give back to students. And not just in my current role, working in compliance, but even just being able to offer any type of advice or any type of guidance to current student athletes. And that's one of the things I really enjoy about working in college athletics, particularly at this level. You kind of get to do a little bit of everything, even outside of your realm of expertise. And specifically my field, my official title is actually compliance and administration. So I actually do a lot more than just compliance, but the compliance part, I was always interested in going to law school and getting a sports law degree. So that just kind of led me to compliance. It's really just understanding bylaws. So I had no interest in actually practicing law or being a sports agent or anything. And working those 2 years at Case Western as a compliance assistant was a lot of fun. As dry as the law can be, it is still fun being able to interpret it and apply it in certain situations. So this was kind of a expected career path for me.
So compliance can be a little bit of a broad term. Can you kind of get into specifically what a compliance director would do and how that would differ from what you do at Carroll and what that might look like at a bigger Division I institution specifically?
Yeah, definitely. Question I get a lot so at Carroll, compliance officer is in charge of everything that has to do with eligibility, recruiting, just making sure that we're following the NCAA bylaws as far as what is allowed with recruiting. And we kind of cover, I mean, anytime we need like roster certified, if anybody joins a new team, making sure that, compliance paperwork is done, making sure academic standards are being met by students. I mean, like I said, we kind of cover everything. And one of the biggest differences between being at, Carroll versus being at a bigger school. At a bigger school, there are multiple compliance officers, and one or two might be responsible for only one bylaw. So, for example, bylaw 17 is just on practice and playing season. So you might have a compliance officer who their entire job is just to keep track of when the season is and when teams are practicing. Or another one might be responsible just for eligibility, or one is just responsible for transfer. Whereas at our level at Carroll, I take care of all of that. So I keep track of when we start playing, when we start practicing, how many practices we have. If we have transfer students coming in or transfer students coming out, I take care of both. So it's a lot more going on at the D3 level as far as responsibility. It's also a lot more fun than having to deal with just one law and sticking to that, because after a while that tends to get boring. So as far as that is, try to condense it a little bit, that is what compliance entails for the most part at this level. You're muted.
You're on mute, Rusty.
Sorry about that. Katie, let me ask you the same question here. So what drew you to college athletics, and what specifically about the sports information aspect of things?
Thanks for the question, Rusty, and Mike, thanks for the invitation to be a part of this panel today. I think Bianca kind of started off a similar trend of how many of us end up in college athletics. Is we've been around sports our whole life, and you just find it as part of you. And so I grew up playing sports in high school, into junior college and whatnot, and was just always passionate about it. I went to Loras, though, as a math and sport management major, thinking that I would go more of an analytics route and something of that sort. Took up an opportunity to kind of intern in the sports information department there and really liked it, enjoyed it, liked being able to do so many different things. Like Bianca said, wear so many different hats and kind of get your hands into so many areas. Like you get so much wide variety of experience. So I kind of took that opportunity and really enjoyed it. Tried a professional internship, which I had a great opportunity with the Chicago Sky and the WNBA. Thought it was great, but really felt that college athletics was more of where I wanted to be. And then that kind of snowballed into the assistant position at Loras, into a GA position at Eastern Michigan, an assistant director, and now the director at Illinois Wesleyan.
You kind of had a unique situation at Loras where you kind of get thrown into more of a full-time job role while you're still a student. Can you tell those who are joining us today kind of what that how that came about, and how you prepare yourself to make a jump into a professional avenue before you've even completed your undergraduate work?
Yeah, my situation at Loras was really interesting. It was like going into the second semester of what was my senior year. I had an extra semester left after that. So the spring semester and the SID at the time, there was only one person, John Dunham. He taught me a ton, and I still keep in contact with him to this day. But he said, you know what, I'm getting out of it. I have this other opportunity. It's better for my family and I. By the way, my last day is, January 6th. So I'm like, okay, cool. So what's what are they going to kind of do? Who am I reporting to? What do I need to be doing? He's like, I think they're going to have you do it. And I was like, what? So I met with our athletic director at the time, Bob Quinn, and talked to him. And he was like, yeah, I think you, and it was me and another student, are just going to handle it. Well, I said, what's the timeline for hiring someone? He's like, well, we hope to have someone in place by the end of the semester. Mind you, it's the beginning of the semester. Plenty of schoolwork and things like that. Being a math major, I had a thesis that was due, plenty of other things that I had going on, but we were hosting an NCAA Division III wrestling regional. We had a Division III national championship in the heavyweight that year. Our women's basketball team made it to the NCAA tournament for the first time. And so it was just a little bit of, our student athletes, regardless of who is the sports information director or not, deserve to have their accomplishments, talked about and promoted and their story told. And so we just kind of channeled in that kind of energy and said, we're going to make this happen. And this is how we're going to do it. And we took it a day by day, week by week approach to it.
So Mark, let me ask you the initial question that I've asked the other two. And again, a reminder that if you have questions for our three panelists today, to go ahead and add those into the group chat, and we will get to those as we go through the session today. But Mark, what was it that drew you to doing your athletic training work in college athletics, and specifically what drew you as an athlete into the field of athletic training?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled upon athletic training. I did in high school what they labeled as a health occupation route, meaning that was more health field oriented, really pushing people to become PAs and physicians and that such. When I visited Indiana Wesleyan, I ended up visiting the athletic department and saw the athletic training role. And with my experience in high school in that realm, kind of fit. Specifically, it was the two routes were either athletic training or exercise science. Exercise science didn't really dump you into after college a really good spot for where I wanted to be, and therefore I chose to go the athletic training route. Very difficult being a college athlete and having to find your role in the athletic training field. Rewarding, but I think the love of sport for me and the medical side of things, which came from high school pretty much. None of my family members are in the medical field, but I think kind of lined me up for doing the athletic training in college. Like I said, it was not easy, but I think that's kind of where my path drew me. And then out of that, after those 4 years, ended up getting a job out in Wheaton. Applied to Wheaton College specifically for an assistant position, didn't get that. And luckily my resume ended up in the lap of the head AT at that point, who was looking to fill a different position. So I've been there for 10 years. It's been great.
You also do some clinical work. So how do you balance, and what is the difference between what you do with your clinical practicing and more of the athletic training side with what you see here at the college level? Yeah,
the clinical is honestly not my favorite, but it is basically day to day. You're working alongside the physician or PA in their office. For me, it's our lucky enough to work with our sports med doc at Wheaton, Dr. Watt. He's a shoulder and knee surgeon, so he sees all the athletes at school, which gives me a little bit of an in from the clinical side of things to schedule our athletes, get them in quick with the docs and so forth. But the physician extender side of things is really just rooming patients, taking vitals. Dr. Watt will have us do some home exercise programs and such, but it's really just clinical doctor office work that I got into my field to be outside. So I deal with that, but it gets me to where I want to be. And so that's kind of the two sides. I think, does that answer your question, Rusty?
Yeah, I think so. I think that draws a pretty good comparison to the two. Kitty, what do you feel are some of the more important aspects of your job, and how do you feel a job in sports information that is usually more behind the scenes, how do you see that it positively impact your student athletes?
It's a great question. There's so much to our job. There's so many different parts, but I think, storytelling in and of itself is probably the most important, because I think it's all encompassing. There has to be a story in order for you to tell it. And so part of that is, meeting and learning about your student athletes and what they're accomplishing off the field or court or outside the pool, whatever it might be. Telling the story of how games go, and that includes statting the games. But also nominating our student athletes for awards that they are deserving of, and making sure that they're in the conversation for those type of things, and just promoting and sharing the voice of not only our athletic department, but each of the individual programs. Because I think, from a recruiting perspective, I always kind of drive back to that. When, you're a high school student athlete and you maybe follow a team on social media, you're trying to figure out, who they are and what they do. And I think social media and how we approach it as sports information professionals plays a big role in how that's perceived from someone who might not be in practice every day.
How have you seen that kind of change as social media has become more and more prevalent, especially with upcoming high school athletes, prospective college student athletes in the last 2-3 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's put a bigger emphasis on the social media content creation side of things. It's, I think, put a bigger emphasis on, photos of things and having that, not just having it somewhere, but having it accessible. So the student athletes themselves can share it. That's something we have a Google Drive set up with each of our teams here, where they can access photos and video clips and everything that we're at. They kind of have access to share it and tell their own stories to a certain degree. So I think it's being comfortable and kind of embracing that change within our industry.
Bianca, beyond just the forward-facing parts of social media, there's an added element to compliance as well, and added complications with social media. How have you seen that affect the way you track things over the last few years as messaging has changed the way the NCAA has approached recruiting?
Actually, social media hasn't impacted as much, I think, as people would think, at least on our level. I think the biggest ones are really just making sure that coaches understand when they can reach out to athletes, at least publicly versus privately, and then trying to make sure they understand what's the difference. Thankfully, I don't really have to go on and track every single movement, making sure every coach hasn't publicly reached out to, a prospective student. I feel like then I would actually need 2 other people to help me out with that. But, just kind of, I think that's probably been the biggest impact, just making sure that coaches are aware of what the rules are. And then, kind of following our own teams, following our coaches on social media, just making sure, just kind of keeping an eye out rather than policing what they're doing. Since compliance already kind of gets a bad name, but or a bad rep. But that's been really the biggest part of my job as far as that goes.
Yeah, you mentioned the bad rep. How do you kind of navigate that? What kind of built-in tension that you'll have sometimes with coaches when it comes to sometimes delivering bad news or trying to navigate those kind of situations that coaches want to blame you when you're not the person at fault here?
Yeah, no, definitely just being sympathetic has been helpful. I think it helps that one, being a former athlete, and then having being on the coaching side and still kind of being on the coaching side now. I do help out with the baseball team too, but understanding where the coaches are coming from, that it could be frustrating when there are times where I have to tell them, no, we can't do that. But yeah, just making sure they understand that, hey, I wish we could do things differently. They understand, and I try to make sure that they know that if there's any possible way that we can make it work, we will try. It's not going to be a no and that's it. I'm not even going to look into it. I always make sure to at least look into the law. And that's honestly, I think that's one of the most important parts of my job, is not really knowing the bylaw, but being able to interpret it in a way that if there is any possible way to make things work for your athletes, then you do. And there actually have been times already in the last year and a half where there might be a bylaw we thought was interpreted one way, and I was able to get the NCAA's backing to interpret it another way, and that actually helped out. So making sure that they understand, always willing to do whatever is necessary to help our athletes. And if there's really nothing to do, at least we've done everything we can.
Mark, obviously athletic trainers also have that same kind of tension with coaches sometimes. So how do you navigate that give and take with coaching staffs and when athletes are available, when they're not, when they need to focus on rehab instead of other parts of practices? And how do you work that relationship to have the best positive impact on the student athlete?
Yeah, that's difficult. Obviously our job as an ATC is pretty much giving them bad news all the time. So that comes off poorly sometimes. And, some coaches are different, but generally what I've found at Wheaton is communication is huge. So not only the way you deliver stuff, but again, depending on the coach, constant communication on where their player is at, whether it's rehab or return to play. Trying to keep them up to date as much as you can without overwhelming them, because they've got a lot more going on. But yeah, it's really difficult. Again, I've worked with a few coaches at school. You're communicating with not just the coaches, but the patient athlete as well. Sometimes family members too. But just trying to communicate with them, give them specifics and not generals as best you can, which is, again, is hard with, it's not you. So it's hard to give specifics when it's not you, but trying to get them comfortable with kind of the unknowns as we work through injury or rehab or whatnot. Yeah, it's just, like I said, it's hard.
Just want to remind everybody, if you do have questions that you'd like the panelists to answer, go ahead and put them into group chat and we will get to them. Mark, how do you deal with, more importantly, maybe hands-on with student athletes? Because the student athlete will tell you they're good to go, they're fine, they're telling the coach they're fine, but you have to be the one that kind of grounds that plane and tries to offer the big picture of why it's not in their best interest.
Yeah, I think what you said is correct. Big picture, that's what I've been trying to, I guess, instill in the athletes I'm in charge of is big picture, not a short-term success. It's similar to talking to the coaches. I think having a good relationship with the athlete specifically is key. So you're really working to build trust throughout the year, and for those that are there for 4 or 5 years, eventually that comes, but you're kind of reliant on the upperclassmen for the freshman and sophomore class to get them to really buy into what you're telling them and buy into what you're telling them is true. So I think it differs from person to person, but again, it comes down to a relational aspect, which then flows into trust. So if I'm telling somebody that they're out for 4 weeks with a sprained ankle, I kind of will overplay it so that it looks maybe a little bit better as we progress and are hitting those goals that we're wanting to meet quicker than maybe initially thought. I would say deceptively, but in some aspects, there's a little bit of deception with trying to play the mind games on who's going to push and who's not. And who you can push and who you can't. So I think that the main aspect of that is just building trust.
Bianca, what advice would you offer to student athletes who are interested in pursuing college athletics, but specifically the law side? Because like you mentioned, there's a lot of different avenues that they could pursue. And then what would you recommend those first steps being as they have that interest in that field?
I would say, consider law school. It's not necessary or not required. I think it was helpful for me because I was still kind of exploring different areas even outside of college athletics. But like right now, also get involved with your athletic department currently. You reach out to your compliance officer. That's what I did in law school, was just ask if there was any way I could help out. You can still do that as an undergrad. Even if there's not a lot to do, you can ask questions, research. We have a current grad student who asked me about, learning more about the compliance side. And honestly, I just gave him the NCAA manual and said, have at it. It's available to download online. You can look up the bylaws. It's not the most fun to read, but if you if you know what the law is, that's half the battle right there, honestly. And if you have any questions, again, you can reach out to your compliance officer, ask for advice. You don't even have to reach out to your current one at your school. You can reach out to other ones, but that's a huge part, not just in compliance, but college athletics in general, is just reaching out, networking, learning as much as you can. Take advantage of the resources you have right now.
Katie, I think sports information is kind of a field that a lot of people don't realize how wide it reaches. So what would you offer as advice to any student athletes who would be interested in various aspects of sports information, and even if they don't even realize that that's kind of what a sports information director does?
Yeah, I think Bianca kind of hit it on its head with reaching out to people. We've done, I think, a pretty good job in the last year and a half of really building our student staff, but nobody has the same role in our office. We've got kids that wanted to get into graphic design, and so they help with some social media content creation, but then we have others that really enjoy writing. Like Rusty said, it's so all-encompassing that don't limit yourself in anything, but don't be afraid to try different things to the same degree. It's kind of fun being able to do so many different things because every day brings a different kind of surprise of what you're working on. But look at, what school maybe you're either at or close by that you want to help out with, and reach out to those people and see what opportunities there are.
Mark, obviously Wheaton has a fair number of student trainers. So how would you encourage those who are interested in athletic training to make those first steps towards a career in that field?
Yeah, I agree with everyone. I think experience is important. So either internships, shadowing, or those types of things, even just to get a feel for what it is you like and dislike of each position. I think that's very valuable. Something I did not do going into college was kind of experience the different aspects of athletic training. Fortunately for me, I ended up in the college setting, which is where I wanted to be. But some people really enjoy high school. Some people don't. Some people enjoy clinic. And again, some people don't. So I think it's just the importance of having a diversifying your experiences, and kind of eliminating what you really don't want to do and trying narrowing your choices there.
One more question, and then we'll get to the questions that you guys are submitting. And again, if you have questions you'd like the panelists to answer, go ahead and drop them in the group chat, and we will get to those in just a second. And Katie, I'll start with you kind of for this final two-parter. What are the moments that affirm your choice to kind of go into the career path that you did? And then at the end of the day, what are you most proud of with what you do and your role there at Illinois Wesleyan?
Yeah, I guess the first part, kind of reaffirming my role, when we were kind of going through that transition at Loras, and there was a lot of kind of uncertainty, and Taylor, the other student, and I were just kind of trying to hold it together. Seeing a student athlete win a national championship and kind of reach the peak of, what each of our student athletes try to and strive to accomplish competitively, and see him accomplish that and be able to, help promote and share that and cover that. I remember at the end of the year, him coming up and just kind of saying like, thank you for doing that. I don't know how you two did that, juggling finals and all of these things, but, I appreciate it, and his grandpa wasn't able to be there, but he was able to see those things. And those are the moments that I'm reminded of the impact that we can have, being able to tell those stories and do that. But at the end of the day, I think the thing I'm most proud of is seeing, day to day, our staff. We have 2 graduate assistants and our student worker staff's about 7 now. But seeing how they improve like over the course of the year is so cool. Being able to kind of, sit down and talk to them about what their career goals are and kind of help with how we can shape their experience in our office, to kind of set them up for that. And sometimes that's not sports information. Sometimes it's, strictly video or creative content, graphic design. But being able to see their growth, I think, is kind of the thing I'm most proud of.
Bianca, let me ask you the same question. What are the moments that you get to experience on a day-to-day basis that affirm your decision to go into that field? And then at the end of the day, what are you most proud of?
So the moments that reaffirm me going into this field, it's actually less day to day. It doesn't happen very often. In compliance, I actually hope nothing happens. The day that stuff happens is when you might have messed up somewhere. So, but those times where you get excited, I call those wins. It's, when a waiver goes through, gets approved, or like I said, when I had a bylaw that I was able to get the NCAA to back me on, and it actually helped one of our coaches with recruiting. So little things like that definitely reaffirm my, desire to be in this area. Again, doesn't happen often, but when they do happen, they're pretty big. But at the end of each day, honestly, I'm most proud of when a coach doesn't have to come in and ask me a question, or I didn't have a coach come in and tell me, hey, I messed up on this. We're going to have to tell the NCAA. Those are good days in compliance when like I said, there's nothing going on. Those are perfect. Occasionally I'll have those days where, we'll have a simple question and that's fine. I've actually told my coaches, hey, challenge me with an actual hard question, because after a while I tend to get the same ones. But yeah, if we don't have any big issues come up by the end of the day, end of the week, that is a good day and a good week.
Mark, we'll kind of round this out with you. What are the things you see? And I'm sure, like Bianca was saying, less is more in her role, but for you kind of see that probably being more hands-on. What are the wins that you see on a daily basis? And at the end of the day, what are you most proud of?
Yeah, unfortunately, less is more for us as well. As much as we like to invest in our athletes and get to know them, and they don't want to spend time with us. So that's the tough part of our job. But I would say the moments that affirm my role are more in the relational side of things, when you do get to spend time with individuals through rehab, through the lows of their college experience, to especially at Wheaton. I would say there's a little bit of a difference between Wheaton and other colleges in that relationship area. It's more, you're building trust between each other. So you're there in the lows and the highs, and getting to celebrate those small milestones with them. And I think for me, that is really earning and obtaining trust and respect from the athletes and coaches. And if you can do that, you've done a pretty good job, in my opinion. Most proud of, I would say, is just watching people advance. I feel like the college setting is really unique in watching people mature, whether that's a personal maturity, spiritual, social, whatever. For me is watching people advance in those areas. And if I'm lucky enough to have a role in that, then it's another win for me. But So we're here to serve. That's our role, is serving. So at the end of the day, I'm happy if I've made an impact in someone's life.
Well, let's get to some of the questions that we're receiving. And again, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them into the group chat, and we'll go ahead and start with Mark again here. What do you see a typical day look like for you? I know you obviously have the clinical side, but
yeah,
obviously when we're talking about a normal school year, what do you see a typical day look like for you?
Yeah, for me, who splits time, my normal day starts around 8:30 in the doctor's office. They see patients until, the one I'm with could be all day until 4. But I usually pop out around 1:30, 2 o'clock, head over to the college, and I'm at the college from 2 until whatever we're doing is over. That could be 7 o'clock, it could be 9 o'clock. So the days can get very long. But from a day-to-day standpoint in the college is practice prep. Depending on time, it's rehabs. It's trying to send a last-minute text to the coach on who can and who cannot go that day in practice or during a game. Just a lot of hands-on stuff. So it's exciting. It's fun, but it's also draining.
Bianca, you kind of mentioned typical day kind of hopefully involves not a whole lot of questions coming at you, but what does that look like as far as what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis?
So from the compliance standpoint, most of the questions I tend to get are, whether the recruiting questions, what coaches can and can't do. If we have a transfer student who's interested in coming in, what kind of information do they need? What do we need to do a waiver? There's another student who if they're even able to talk to them right now, because since D3's got different rules than D2 or D1, so making sure whether we have like a self-release or they've got permission. And then I'll get kind of general eligibility questions. I've had more eligibility questions obviously this year with the changes with the pandemic, and then students getting a year back. So making sure if students are interested in coming back for fifth year, or even after, like for grad school, what they need to do, how they can remain eligible. So that's the bulk of my questions when they do come in.
Katie, I know a typical day doesn't really exist in sports information, because you really have game days and then you have non-game days. So what does that look like? Let's start with what a game day would look like for you, and then maybe transition into what just a normal day without an event would look like.
Yeah, so game days, obviously games usually start, midweeks are about 7 p.m. usually. So I try and come into the office a little bit later on those days. Just part of it is I drive an hour and 15 minutes to work. And so if I don't have to make the drive from Springfield to Bloomington for another hour, it's an extra hour. I get to sleep in my bed before going up. But so I try and stay, usually get in maybe around like 10 or 11 on a game day. Maybe work from home a little bit in the morning before I go in. And then, we're there for the game. Printing programs, usually we try and take care of that the day before, just in case a printer issue comes about or something of that sort. But making sure everyone kind of knows their responsibilities. So, stat crew is set up, or Genius for stats. Print programs are to where they need to be. Those kind of things are kind of set up. And then a non-game day, usually getting in around somewhere between 8 and 9, just kind of depending on the day and usually the weather. And then, whether it's CCIW Player of the Week nominations, earlier in the week, or previews and getting those ready so that, all of the links to how to follow games for the week are kind of out there and known for people.
What does your job look like then in the summer? Because it's easy to look at sports information as being September to May gig, but what does it look like in the time when you don't have students there?
A lot of archiving, a lot of, updating historical stuff. For me, just having this been my first summer being here, it's a lot of getting used to where some more things are. We moved offices, so what boxes kind of got lost in the shuffle. But it's a lot of archiving. It's a lot of, feature stories, hopefully reaching out with more alumni, we've taken a kind of the approach of taking the summer to do some internal projects. And so doing some graphics around the arena and updating some things like that. So it's not so much game day, but it's more like long-term internal and still upkeep, with social media and things of that sort.
Bianca, we'll go with this question from Colleen. Start with you. How have you seen yourself grow in your time working in college athletics, and have you been able to adapt your career to personal and global changes?
That great question, and I've definitely grown a lot. Primarily because I started my role again last August. Having to jump into a compliance role in the middle of August is very hectic, just because, that's when the bulk of the job gets done, getting ready for the fall season. But I also jumped from professional baseball to this. Like, I went from school straight to professional baseball for 2.5 years and then back into college athletics. So this was a huge transition for me. So not only kind of learning on the job, but also just almost rewiring my brain to go from, baseball operations to this. It's very different being at the college on the college level. So I've definitely grown there, just, getting better at my job, getting better at communicating with coaches, and then also working with higher ups in our university, not just in athletics. I do work with registrar, admissions. So having to work with several other different areas as well has definitely been different. And as far as, personal change, I did mention, I do more than just compliance. And that's one of the things I enjoy about being at this level. Get to work with, our SAC organization on campus, get to work with our baseball team as well, working with them. And that's actually a personal thing for me, since I am still interested in baseball. So getting that chance to still do that and kind of balancing that with compliance as well has been a rare opportunity. It's not one that you see anything at any other level besides really D3. So that's been a change for me. And then other than that, it's kind of been a whirlwind year, and it hasn't been a usual year. I know that for sure. I've still not had a usual full school year in this position. So I'm sure things will still change. I'm sure I've got plenty more to grow as I continue to learn in this position and kind of adjust to everything that gets thrown at me. But that's the joy of being in college athletics.
Mark, let me ask you that question. How have you seen yourself grow in your time? And then how have you seen your ability to adapt your career, especially balancing your clinical work with your athletic training work?
Yeah. For me, growing over time has been more on the clinical skills side of thing. Time management, clinical skill, communication, always working on that. Communicating with athletes, obviously we're delivering, I would say, more than half the time bad news to them. So trying to work on delivery of that stuff and still be both firm and trustworthy in our decision making. So that's come a long way for me. Time management, like I said, has been also something that's difficult to nail down sometimes with, teams of 30 plus people going different directions all the time. So I think in that area, I've grown as well. Obviously that has more than just an effect at my job. So that's kind of a multi-level improvement for me, which has been great. Adapting to my career is very difficult. It's very up in the air. Our hours are not normal. Similar to the AD and sports information role, we're kind of on call. So trying to manage, I've got a kid now, trying to manage family time, wife time, personal time has been challenging, but doable for sure. yeah, it's just ever changing. So this year's been especially difficult with, I'm an hourly employee. When you take away sports, it's tough. So just trying to adapt and find ways to still be intentional with people, and trying to still pursue in advancement in career as well.
How have you seen yourself have to adapt, especially this year, given the restrictions of a global pandemic? And to hit Mark's question, how do you see students who want to get experience in athletic training, how do they do that given the current atmosphere that we're in, and not necessarily getting to be as in person or hands-on as they normally would get to?
Yeah, this year has been tough. Our day-to-day was basically we had to see athletes by appointment only. Typically, they all flood in at the same time, which is overwhelming in its own right. But from a scheduling standpoint, it's actually kind of nice. And I wish pre-COVID we had done something similar. So there's definitely been some positive changes in that side of things. But from a day-to-day standpoint, it's really affected the amount of people we've been around. Instead of, like I said, a group of 20, in my case, 20 female athletes coming in from the soccer team, in a half hour, they're now spread out throughout the day, which is a little bit easier to manage and produce some meaningful work with them. But as far as like an experience side of things go, I don't really know. We had our student trainers were limited. We're limited in the number of people we could have in our athletic training room and in the facility in general. So I don't know where that's going to go. Hopefully it'll get a little bit better, but as far as experiencing athletic training without actually being there is tough. I'll answer a little bit of the question above too. It's if you're recommend shadowing or interning during this time, it'll probably be tough, but you should definitely explore everything that you can. No's are okay, but if you don't ask, you never know. So get experience with stuff you like or dislike. Like I said, it's valuable information, and the last thing you want to do is get into a situation where you're now starting a job that you knew you weren't going to like, and now you really don't like it. So that would be a tough spot to be in. But who knows? COVID is ever changing. I think our day-to-day, even week to week at Wheaton was changing very frequently too. So make the most out of it, I guess.
Katie, let me ask you the question from Colleen. How have you seen your time grow while working in college athletics, and how have you been able to adapt to? You mentioned some of the personal changes of just having to jump from a student into a professional role, but also from a bigger picture as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've definitely improved writing. As a math major in college, you can imagine the amount of writing I did, and it was very minimal. So going into a field that is predominantly writing, I've continued to kind of grow in that area, I think, on the most basic level, I suppose. And then, just my understanding of social media, of, what is, prioritizing and how to go about doing that. I think, it can be daunting when you're looking at a weekend when you're going to have, every sport at home or something of that sort, and try and get bogged down. And so really, organizing things and prioritizing them in the way that they need to be done. I think I've gotten a better grasp on that. I think there's been some challenges probably from my transition from a Division I school at Eastern Michigan, where yes, I didn't have as many sports, obviously, but I was traveling with them on the road every day. I mean, I was on 15-day road trips and things like that. So it was a different kind of busy. And bringing now back to this and having to kind of spread out and be in touch with so many different sports, I think has been something I've adapted to in the last year and a half, coming back to Division III and getting into that role. And then what was the last part of your question, Rusty? I'm sorry.
I guess I think you kind of addressed it, but how do you see yourself kind of adapting to the global demands of the job?
Yeah, I mean, I think, globally there's a lot of different stories to tell. And I think, I'm part of our DEI action committee, actually, along with Colleen, who Mike just wrote a story on her. And so we've taken it upon like, how are we telling our stories, and not just that we're telling them, but like how and whose story are we telling? Are we telling, the same story over and over again? Or are we telling like different people, different experiences, different perspectives? And so kind of adapting and pushing myself there to kind of reach out a little bit more in that kind of area.
We'll wrap up here with this question from Morgan, and Mark, we'll start with you. Would you
Hey,
recommend
Rusty,
shadowing?
before you continue, I did have a couple questions that were sent to me, so I do have a couple more after this one.
Mark, would you recommend interning? You kind of mentioned it. Would you recommend doing so at the level that they're interested in working, or just kind of getting in wherever you can get experience?
I'd say try and do everything. Like I mentioned before, last thing you want to do is get into a situation that you don't want to be in. So for me, I did part of my hours in undergrad were in the high school setting, in the college setting, in the clinic setting. I knew pretty quick I didn't want to be in the high school setting. That's just my preference, and personality doesn't match with high school students. So I think without having that experience, it would I probably would have applied to some high schools just out of curiosity and necessity at that point. But I think a wide variety is a good way to go, if you can.
Bianca, you mentioned you had the background in Major League Baseball and the professional aspect. So how would you recommend getting that balance? Is it kind of plugging where you'd like to be, or similar to what Mark said, just find somewhere that you can get that experience and do so, and you can kind of branch out from there?
I'd actually agree with that. I mean, definitely try to go where you think you're interested in, but you really don't know until you kind of experience different areas. And I had a similar experience as an undergrad. I actually didn't do compliance as an undergrad. I did everything else: radio, video, business, marketing. And that's how I discovered, okay, that's not the area of college athletics I'm interested in. But it's only because I actually took the chance and then finally got into compliance and enjoyed it. So yeah, if there's an area you think you are interested in, definitely try that. But don't be afraid to try other areas as well, because you might be surprised and find there actually might be an area you like even better.
Katie, from a similar question, you had talked earlier about the different veins of sports information. So do you encourage your student workers or anyone interested to try everything, or find that one area that you can be really good at and excel in that spot?
We kind of, take an approach of let's try everything and kind of find what you like. And if you don't like something, tell me, type of thing, just to get your feet wet, because there's so many different facets of what we do that can kind of line them up. And then we kind of take what they're interested in, and now we're preparing, one of our students is going to be applying for internships for this summer. And so like, what kind of internships is she looking for? Where are we looking? And kind of helping her through that process.
Mike, you said you had a couple questions there?
Yep, we got time for a couple more questions. This is from Emily. What was the biggest challenge from leaving the playing athletics side, or if you were just a student, leaving the student side to going into quote unquote real world jobs?
Katie, you want to take that one?
Katie, you've touched on some of that, but anything more to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always hard to like leave that competitive nature. Like you leave, like for me, it was like having to build a new routine outside of sports. So like working out on my own and figuring out all of that, because now it wasn't just built into my day. It wasn't just like what I'm doing. And so kind of, adapting in that way, I think is probably one of the biggest things, but just being able to kind of compartmentalize your competitive feelings, because as a sports information professional, you can't be, openly cheering on press row, even though you want more than anything for your student athletes to succeed. You can't be, cheering in that sense. So that I think is a common struggle in our field as students come through and as people kind of grow through the profession.
Bianca, let me ask you that, and then Mark as well. But both of you do some coaching as well. Do you feel like that helps you kind of make that transition?
Sort of. I'd say, I mean, the coaching side actually helps me keep, that competitive aspect to the side, because that has not gone away yet. I find some way to compete everywhere. Honestly, the biggest transition for me, and this coaching has sort of helped with this, was more adapting to the leadership position. Because while I might have worked in professional sports, my most recent position was still an intern. So I was like lowest rung. And then all of a sudden jump to a position where I'm in charge of all the compliance and people are actually coming to me with questions. So my first couple of weeks, I kind of forgot that I had other people I could also ask for help or ask to kind of take on different duties. I kind of took on everything until our AD finally came to me and said, we have student workers who could help you with this. Because I was so used to doing everything myself. Or if somebody came and asked me a question, my first thought was, okay, I got to find, the boss or the supervisor and see if this is okay. And then realized, oh, wait, technically that's me. So that was definitely a huge transition. Not just going from like student to a real life position, but just, jumping into this role. And I'd say coaching kind of helped with that because you have to be in that leadership position. So it was an easier transition since I also had the coaching side as well, but it was still a very interesting one for those first like month or two as I adjusted to it.
We have time for one more question. This is kind of a two-parter, and it's from Dayton. When did you start interning? Was it for the folks that have interned? When did you start? Were you undergrad still? Were you out of college? And secondly, when you were an intern, what kind of responsibilities were expected of you? Bianca, you touched on that a little bit, but anything else you wanted to add?
Honestly, I might not be the best person to answer that because I mean, I did work as a compliance assistant in grad school. I guess that would be my internship. All my other internships had nothing to do with law or compliance, but at least with the compliance assistant, like I said, I did that in grad school, and that's because they were specifically looking for a law school student. We were transitioning to an electronic database to keep track of our compliance forms. And since I had already had the sports law background and I was interested, they asked me to help out with that. And that kind of went from just helping with the transition to, hey, I'm also willing to help out with these different areas. And it kind of took on a role of its own, which I found even in professional sports, a lot of internships tend to do that. I didn't intern as an undergrad, but that's because I was working part-time jobs and kind of doing everything else, trying to figure out what I was interested in. I actually didn't decide to take this route until college. I had a completely different route before that. So my first real internship wasn't until the summer after I graduated. And I was actually a marketing intern. And then, from there, I interned through grad school and then after up until this current position.
Mark, did you want to touch on that question?
Yeah, sure. I didn't really know what athletic training was in high school. The trainer at my school was non-existent, if anything. So I didn't really have a good base to go off of. I didn't end up doing any internships until college, and that was developed through our program. So it wasn't really nothing I did on my own. I was already set up for me, fortunately. Had I do it over again, I probably would have tried to nail down something in at least the summer going into college. I know a lot of people are undecided coming into college, and maybe that freshman year is a good time to kind of get gen eds out of the way and pick up something that you're interested in to at least see if the interest catches your attention a little bit more. But I don't think necessarily that doing an internship in college is by any means put you behind. I think they all are valuable in their own right. But again, for me, that's how it kind of worked out for me, is developed in through into the program I was in.
And Katie?
Yeah, the program that I was in at Loras as a sport management major kind of pushed us to do a lot of internships. And so I think that it made it easier for me to find some things. We had a USHL hockey team in town. So, you know, being able to intern with them, being able to intern in sports information was more, you know, game days, but it was doing stats and maybe moving the camera, you know, for the stream, those kind of things. Whereas USHL team was more marketing and promotions, ticket sales. And so just being able to take in all of those different opportunities. I think each of my internships were different and kind of presented different things that I could do. My internship with the Chicago Sky was, you know, planning and hosting youth development camps. And so coordinating with the marketing team on which player might be making an appearance at that camp, but then also coming up with the schedule of what that camp was going to look like for the day. Much different than what I do today, but kind of showed me that, you know, maybe I did want to do a little bit more of what I'm doing now as opposed to what that internship offered.
All right. Well, again, thank you to Bianca, Katie, and Mark for joining us on the panel today. We appreciate all the insights that you guys have provided, and please stay safe, and certainly wish you the best. Again, I want to remind everybody we do have openings for tomorrow's session about careers in coaching. That'll be the same time from 4 to 5. And we also want to thank all of you who tuned in to join us this evening. Have a great rest of your evening, and hope everyone has a great holiday season.
Thanks, Rusty. Thanks, Mike.